What's that? Who there? Whoa.
All right, guys, I've got David Roger, the co-founder and CEO of Felix Gray. David, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, man, I'm pumped to do this. So I'm a big fan of the brand. I have my Felix Grays right here, and I actually wear them daily. So I'm really excited to dive in with you today. So, before we get into the blue light glasses and how you built the brand, I like to start, as many podcast hosts do, with your background, because I think it's helpful just to get a little flavor of, who you were growing up and how you thought about entrepreneurship. So maybe take us through that story to start.
Yeah, sure. So, as a little kid, I grew up, family in medicine. My dad's doctor, my mom's a nurse. So entrepreneurship, definitely not on the table at all. I will say that early on, definitely was always questioning why something had to be the way it was, whether it was whether it was the format of a test or whatever it was. I was just kind of being why does it have to be this way? It doesn't have to be this way. Just because someone says it is that way doesn't mean it has to be. And probably a really annoying kid because my parents, when they were because I said so, I was and they were yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Why? And then, I went to Cornell, started in 2009, and I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I really liked the side of arguing and debating and kind of those thought exercises. But pretty early on, after my freshman year, just kind of realized, I kind of saw my path, and I realized that it just wasn't going to allow for that same amount of creativity. And at that same time, mobile in particular was starting to really grow and blossom, and you're seeing a lot of companies start and build things that are pretty incredible. And this is the early days of TechCrunch was really cool to read and all those types of things. And I just kind of got hooked on just this idea of, wow, you can start from nothing and you can actually build something. And the amount of work that it requires, the amount of creativity, the fact that there's really no right and wrong answer, and you can it's all about execution half the time. You could go one way or another way. It really is about the execution. That really, drew me in. And so I started working for startups in my summers in between college, where other friends were going to work at a bank or a law firm. I was working at these, finding these startups to work at. Ended up starting a newspaper at Cornell called The Odyssey, which was kind of this national brand that then was specific to each individual university. That was a really amazing lesson on just learning how to sell print advertising to local businesses, which if you need a lesson in selling, definitely go try to do that. And yeah, I just loved it. And so when I graduated college, I actually joined Venture for America, which is basically a program started by Andrew Yang. He's now running for New York City mayor, was running for president in the 2020 election as a Democratic nominee. And it was a pretty amazing experience. I got to work with Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos, on his project to revitalize downtown Las Vegas. And, that's kind of how I got into entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I'd be remiss if we didn't hit on the Tony Hsieh influence a little bit, because I feel what a rare opportunity, especially right out of college when you're, the most moldable. And so I figured, I'd love to ask you, what are some of the biggest takeaways and learnings as you soaked up the way he ran businesses and almost the ethos that he lived with, which has become infamous? What are some of the biggest takeaways that you brought with you, in your journey with Felix Gray?
Yeah, totally. So I went to work for Tony, had built a company called Link Exchange, sold it to Microsoft, and then took over Zappos and grew that, sold that to Amazon. But Amazon really allowed Zappos to run independently. Zappos based out of Las Vegas. I worked for Tony on his project to revitalize downtown Las Vegas called Downtown Project. Basically, he put in $350 million of his own money into revitalizing this area that really was kind of pretty seedy, kind of run down. The idea being that there's no walkable area in Vegas besides the Strip, and most locals don't want to hang out of the Strip, nor can you really afford to. Everything's crazy tourist prices, right? And so that was the idea, that was the impetus, and I think some of the big things there, it really all came down to caring about the customer. And whether that was at Zappos and what you saw on the e-commerce side, or whether that was in the mostly bars and restaurants that we were building to build up demand in that area, how are we going to create a great experience for someone? So they're going to like smile. They're going to enjoy themselves. They're going to enjoy interacting with this brand. They're going to enjoy interacting with this bar, with this restaurant, and making people happy. And I think that at the core of what we do at Felix Gray is really, really customer centric. And I think just through osmosis of being there for a couple of years and just kind of seeing how important that is, and just seeing that if I were a customer, that's how I would a company want to treat me. That's just an ethos that we carried over to FG.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so walk us through that origin story, because I know, I was researching for this interview, and I know there's an interesting story about how you were working and started to feel the fatigue. And I think a lot of people probably feel that. So take us through that origin story, and then I want to dive into kind of how you assess the market opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. So when I got to Downtown Project, like I said, definitely not a normal startup that you're part of. I did 350 million building this whole downtown area. Pretty cool experience, but it was the Wild West. We had no idea if projects were going to make money or lose money. And we're talking about projects that are, $1 million to $25 million. And they basically kind of like threw me in. They're like, figure this out. And I'm like, okay, I've never taken a finance class. I do know Excel, but I think that's one of the things that I think anyone who's in any sort of like early stage company, whether they're starting it or they're just starting out early on, I think that I got really good advice one time, like Google your way to victory, right? So just like, don't ask for everything. Don't expect that you're going to be taught it. Just like the internet is an amazing place. Just like figure out how to do stuff and be resourceful. And that was all really cool, but it didn't mean that I was in front of Excel for like 12 hours a day, eventually building these financial models, trying to figure out what concepts are going to make money, how they're not going to make money, how to tweak them to make money. And it really became important on that front. And my eyes just started to absolutely kill me. And I remember one time I got home from work. It might be like 8:30. I'm a big basketball fan. I wanted to watch this. I think it was the Warriors at the time. So it was like probably 2013. So they're just starting to, get better. And I was like, all right, I'm going to watch the Warriors game, chill out, have a beer. I couldn't even watch the game. I was like, my eyes were so exhausted. I was like, this sucks. And kind of looked around and had been noticing, half of my coworkers, half of my friends are complaining about the exact same type of stuff. And I'm like, why is this a thing? And so start to look and start talking to optometrists and ophthalmologists. I'm interested. It's a problem. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about it. I'm like, why is this a thing? And, talking to enough optometrists, ophthalmologists, you learn that blue light, which comes off of any screen, which most people are familiar with, right? It's high energy light that comes off of any amount of screen, and glare, which is coming off any screen. Those things are going to create a lot of these issues around your eye. The headaches, the dry eyes, the blurry vision, the eye fatigue gets categorized as like digital eye strain. And if you can filter blue light, you can eliminate glare, you can create this more comfortable experience. So I'm like, all right, cool. I'm going to get some of these. And there are two options. They're either these like crazy yellow lens hunting goggle type glasses that make you look like one of the X-Men, or there are these clear lenses that all these optometrists and ophthalmologists are like, yeah, they don't really do anything. It's placebo. And I'm like, why can't there be both? Like, why can't I look like a normal person, like feel good about what I'm wearing, putting on my face, and at the same time have something that's effective? And that's kind of how the genesis started to happen. Like, how do you make someone's eyes feel good, but make them feel good, then feel confident in who they are? And, since we launched in 2016, we've grown a lot, and, our positioning has changed a lot since then. It's matured a lot. At this point, we like to say that we're a digital wellness company, right? So we ultimately really care about improving the relationship that people have with their technology. And we believe, because we're able to do that on a daily basis, that if you're able to do that, you're able to, empower people to live happier, healthier, more productive lives in a screen-filled world, right? They're happier because their eyes don't kill them at the end of the day. They're able to be more productive. They're able to work that extra 2 hours. But that is how it all started, and now how we've kind of transitioned.
Yeah, it's a massive problem. And I feel like, so I was on the computer. I'm sure most people my age, your age, were on the computer a lot in school, but we weren't constantly also on our phones, like computer, phone, TV, phone, computer, tablet, like it's screens nonstop. And so it's a massive issue that's not going away. Usually I ask founders, when they're approaching a market where there is some kind of incumbent already, like what was the core unique insight that they saw that others were missing? But it kind of feels like you were one of the first, if not the first, in this kind of consumer eyewear market for blue light. And so I guess to flip the question around to you, how did you validate early on that people were willing to spend to solve this problem? You knew people had it because you looked around, everybody's itching their eyes, but how did you think about that strategically?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I in 2015, I left Downtown Project and started building out an MVP and had multiple beta tests with friends to figure out, what was working, what wasn't working, get feedback from them. But again, they were friends, right? And then in the summer of 2015, I met my co-founder through a friend, and he was working, his name's Chris Benedict, and Chris was working at UBS at their hedge fund in front of 4 screens, was like, kind of share the same vision. Why is this not a thing? And so we got working. And initially we said, all right, 2 smart guys, Venture for America, UBS, just like good backgrounds. It was at a time when direct to consumer was raising a ton of money early, like Away Luggage had raised $2 million pre-revenue, no idea, like just an idea.
Yeah, just on a sketch.
Just on a sketch, yeah. And we started doing pitch meetings, and people just kind of were like, no, you're not going to build a market. No one builds a market. You're, especially at the time we were selling glasses specifically that were non-prescription, right? So now we offer prescription, we offer readers, we offer non-prescription, but at the time it was just like people who didn't need glasses were going to wear glasses. And they're like, that's not going to happen. And we just we said, we think this is a big enough problem that we're hearing from enough people. The problem's living right underneath the surface, and you can create a solution that is really rewarding, is a really amazing experience from both a functional, hey, I'm getting rid of my headaches, my eye strain, but also from a fashion, hey, I look great in my glasses. Then, if you can solve both of those things, we thought that we could have something there. And instead of launching and doing a ton of marketing up front and everything else, we were incredibly scrappy. We're basically paying ourselves enough money for rent, and that was it. And from January through April of 2016, we launched in a private beta where we actually did these office try-on programs. So we go into offices all around New York, work with like Spotify and Barclays and LinkedIn and WeWork and Uber, and we go and we say, hey, we'll give 50 of your employees free pairs of these glasses for 2 weeks. It's a fun trial period, something that a culture team can offer. We'll do all the legwork, so you don't have to do anything. And at the end, they can either purchase out of their own pocket or they can return them. And we'll kind of facilitate the drop-offs, the pickups, anything else. And so it's really, really easy for culture teams to say, yeah, this is a cool thing, let's do it. And we were seeing about 1 in 3 people were buying them at the end. Now, they had no idea what Felix Gray was. They had no idea what blue light was. They just knew the product was working and they looked good. And then we get even more people that would email us, like when we picked them up on Friday, the following Wednesday, we'd always get emails. Hey, actually, my eyes are killing me. Like I really wasn't noticing this until I've been wearing them. Can you come back? Because we weren't even shipping online at the time. And from there, we knew that we had something. And we knew that, when we were in front of like a couple thousand people and a lot of these people are enjoying the product without knowing anything about a brand, and it's just the product works and it's good, we knew we had something there, and then we were able to launch from then.
Yeah. And you may have answered this in that last piece, because I think that was great. But one thing I love to ask founders is some of the biggest doubts or holes that they're poking at the very beginning. So, when you're coming up with an idea, and I'm sure a lot of listeners have been there, you have the epiphany moment, you start writing down strategically, like, oh, here's what I could build, here's the market I could serve, et cetera. And then usually you try to poke holes in your own idea. And there's a few things that you poke and you say, if these aren't true, we're dead. And I think they can be true, and I need to go test them. It sounds like one of the things that you needed to be true was that people were willing to wear glasses for a non-prescription, element or item. Were there other things that you in the very early days that you were a little bit concerned about and you needed to prove out with some of those trials?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we had to do, was why we spent over a year in product development, was make sure that we could have a clear lens that actually worked. Because even to this day, most clear lenses, they're filtering only 2 to 3% of blue light. screens produce most blue light at a certain range, and most clear lenses filter 2 to 3% of it. We filter 30% of that range. So we're 15 times more effective. That's why 9 out of 10 people where Felix Gray reports significant improvement. That was something I wasn't sure we were going to be able to do. And so we spent a lot of time in product development to make sure we were developing this amazing lens. And then when we went out, once we knew that the efficacy was actually good, we then had to make sure that people actually not only did they enjoy the experience, but they would actually adopt it and like pay for it. And that was where that, Office Try-On program came from.
Yeah. And so let's dive into that a little bit. So you've got two smart guys, but I don't think either of you had, I guess you're at a medical family, but neither of you had really like formal medical backgrounds or training. So how do you go about step 1, 2, 3 of actually manufacturing these lenses that previously have not existed in the market before?
Yeah, it was a lot of networking. Just like meeting one person, talking to this one ophthalmologist that knew this one person that introduced us to this one lens supplier, us talking to this lens supplier and creating something not working, talking to a different one. It's just a lot of legwork in the beginning when you're building something. And you have to be on top of your shit, if I can say shit.
Yeah, let it fly.
Yeah, you have to be on top of it, right? And you have to also be really good about following up, right? Because it's amazing that someone's even offering you 30 minutes of their time when they don't know you at all. Then, okay, fine. So like treat that with respect. Make sure you know who that person is. Make sure you're prepared. You're not kind of fumbling through that 30 minutes that you get to talk to that person. And if there's any follow-ups, like make sure, to thank them and make sure that you're following up with like what exactly you need from them. Make it as easy as possible for them to like do as little work as possible, because honestly, people are busy with their own days. So it's amazing they're even willing to help in any way. If they have to then guide you through something, it's not going to go anywhere. So you have to do that work. And it's something that we were able to do early on.
Definitely. I want to talk a little bit about brand. So I know you guys have a really strong brand, and it sounds like you're kind of brand through product quality, right? You have 15x better than the competitor, and you're able to claim that, and people can see that and convert. But at the end of the day, the blue light market, since you've launched, has gotten super saturated. It almost seems like there's a bunch of dedicated brands. Many of the sleep brands almost have like blue light glasses as add-ons in their product suite.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got like Amazon trying to knock off at the low price. And so when you have people that do the diligence and they can compare your glasses versus the competitors, it seems like a no-brainer. But a lot of people don't take that time to educate themselves. And so how do you think about today with your leadership team strategizing around getting your brand to permeate through everything else?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think the two things is the most operative word for us is trust, right? And so we need to create something that, whether it is initially when you're prospecting or when you're researching around, that you can trust this more than others. Because honestly, a lot of people treat blue light like it's all equal. Like, hey, it's blue light, it's a checkbox. It's not. It's kind of like sunscreen, right? Like if you're, in the middle of the desert and I give you, SPF 10, like you're still going to get burned.
Yeah, good luck.
And yeah, good luck. Exactly. And so for us, it really is trying to educate the consumer there. What we're seeing a lot of, though, is that because there's so many different companies out there now that are selling different things, and people are not, and it's new, and people are not sure what to do, 80% of our customers do research. So it's really important to do things like this, where we're talking exactly about the fact that we're 15 times more effective. It's really important that we have a whole content strategy developed around like why you can trust us more than others. And then I think at the other side on the brand level, which is really important, is, again, you mentioned earlier, we're probably on front of our phones, tablets, monitors, TVs, 15 hours a day, right? We know that's not a healthy part of our day. We care about the food that we put into our body. We care about the exercise we get. We care about the type of sleep we get. But then we're in front of our desks, we're looking at our phones and everything else, 15 hours a day. We know it's not healthy. In our mind, that's a really interesting pain point in a conversation to help have with the customer and have with the public around this idea of like helping promote a better digital well-being. And we do believe, right, if we have products that is right now at the blue light level, but can expand beyond that, that is research backed, that is clinically backed, that actually has real science that you can trust behind it, real care behind the products that we develop, that is going to help you have a better relationship with your technology like, that is ultimately a win. And I think that it's the combination of like the trust that we have and the quality products that we have, and then this conversation that I don't think any brand is really doing around digital well-being. And I think that that is ultimately how we think about how we continue to be really successful in the saturated market.
Yeah, definitely. And so it sounds like obviously content marketing is a massive component of the pie. I'd love for you to reflect on, were there any outside the box marketing tactics or experiments or, not schemes is a negatively charged word, but different things you've tried that you really haven't seen other brands do? Because if you think about the D2C marketing playbook, you've got some paid in there, you've got a lot of content marketing, growth marketing efforts, et cetera. But I'd love to hear, anything you guys experimented with and tried.
Yeah, so early on, it didn't actually take very well. Word of mouth is still our strongest part of our program, which is awesome. And I think it speaks to the fact that like we have great NPS, we have a great quality product. Like I mentioned, 9 to 10 people who wear Felix Gray report significant improvement. But early on, we did try and incentivize that even further by sending these, instead of like a Warby home try-on, sending them to the office where different people could try on all the frames. But what we found was, we threw a lot of stuff at the wall. This was definitely one of the more out there ideas. What we found was people just didn't feel comfortable like hitting up their entire company saying, hey, I have these pair of Felix Grays at my desk, come try them on. People are like, are you getting paid by this company? What's going on? Like sometimes HR steps in and was like, don't do that. So, there's definitely things that we threw at the wall that were not successful. I think at the end of the day, the things that have been most successful is the fact that we pioneered a market and we've developed a really strong trust with the customer. And I think that when I talk about word of mouth being our strongest component, and still our strongest channel, I still read every review. And every review that's negative, we're reaching out to customer and figuring out how we can fix that. Right? Like we are doing everything in our everything possible. If we know that you're not fully happy, even if you're going to keep your product, we're like, hey, send it back. We'll get you something better. Like whatever you need, we just want to make you happy because I think that happy customers at the end of the day, they're going to tell their friends, they're going to buy more, and that ultimately is how we win.
Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. Sometimes people overcomplicate it, but it really is just having the best product and then being great at customer service. That's awesome. So when you think about, zoom out past marketing, just holistically, right? You were fairly young, I'd say, when you started the company. And so I'm sure you've been able to learn so many lessons with, as a first-time founder. And so one of the questions that seems to do really well on the show, because the listeners are either fans of the brand and love getting a peek behind the curtain or just aspiring founders themselves, are things that really didn't work well. So, it could be team building, brand building. And I know you shared one example there in the marketing stack that maybe you tried and didn't work. But when you zoom out, what are some of the things that you feel like, you wish you could have done differently or just a great learnings to take away next time?
Yeah. So I think so I started the company when I was 24. I had worked about a year and a half, 2 years before starting it. And so I really was coming in pretty new. I think that one of the biggest takeaways is hiring well and creating a process to hire well. So I remember we let go someone. It just wasn't the right fit. We let them go after, I think it was 4 or 5 months in, and it sucked. It sucked a lot. I was like, I don't want to have to do this, especially when it's my fault that, the hiring process that we created, we didn't pick up on a lot of different things. And it was actually nothing to do with quality work. It was everything to do with fit and attitude. And so we really spent a long time working through our hiring process and then our onboarding process to make sure that not only were we going to hire great people, but then we were going to put them in positions to be successful once they came into the company.
Yeah. And I'd love to dive into that hiring process a little bit more. One of the things that, people typically ask are like, what are the attributes you're looking for? And I think that's important, but, fairly similar across a lot of the high performers. I think what's more interesting to me is how you run the process to try to detect those characteristics. And, are there exercises or different questions that you ask that seem to work well at kind of sussing that out?
Yeah, so we have a multi-step process, right? So we have a 45-minute phone screen, really getting a better idea of the candidate, what he or she cares about, what influences them, where they see their career going. And then often it goes into like a work sample where we're giving them a good amount of time to produce something of quality, asking them to put anywhere between 2 and 5 hours into the process, walking us through it. It could be for a programmer, it could be for a VP of sales, it could be for a marketer, it could be for anyone. And then we have a very long format interview at the end. So this interviews probably take like 4 hours. And I would say that we have our scorecard, right? We know what we're looking for. I think the trick is if you're a good interviewer and if you get asked leading questions, you will know exactly how that person wants you to answer that question. The whole idea is like, let's just walk through your story and how you've been able to grow in your career, and asking kind of a series of questions. It's pretty standard through each step of that person's career. And then just as you get good at it, you're just good at picking up on little things here. That's interesting. You poke a little bit, and so you're not asking these questions where someone knows what the answer is going to be. They have no idea. They don't have to prepare a ton or anything else. You're just understanding how they think, how they feel, how they've interacted with other companies. And sometimes that might mean they're like a great candidate for someone else. They're just not a candidate for us. And teasing out those things are, I think, the most important. And that comes with just a lot of practice.
Yeah, a lot of reps. It seems like that's the consistent advice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you think about like long term for Felix Gray, you're manifesting the future. As I was prepping for this, I was thinking a question that I'd love to pick your brain on is, do you think the market is big enough just in like blue light glasses to satisfy your future vision, zoom 5 years, 10 years out? Or are there other product verticals that you want to explore that are complementary but different to blue light? And kind of what does that roadmap look like? Manifest the future a little bit.
Yeah, so it's a great question. I think the blue light market continues to grow in pretty significant ways. And I think that what we're seeing on the blue light side is the more the customers, 5 years ago, no one knew what the hell blue light was. Right now, most people know what blue light is. And what you're seeing more and more is as the space matures and people become more knowledgeable, the customer becomes more discerning. They're starting to say, okay, well, why is there this $20 pair on Amazon, this $50 pair that I can buy from this sunglasses company, and like a Felix Gray at $95? And on the blue light side, it's our job to continue to help the customer navigate a crowded space and let them know, look, if you're buying something for price, cool, these are the prices that make sense and the products that make sense. If you're buying something that still not going to break the bank, but you're going to get a higher quality product by a significant degree, this is, Felix Gray. But I do think that ultimately what I've talked about is, we are a digital wellness company. We care about improving the relationship between people and their technology. And I won't say what, but there are definitely opportunities in the eye health side and beyond that make a lot of sense for us to, again, be a research-backed, clinically backed product suite that helps support your digital well-being.
Yeah. And we don't obviously need to go into those. We'll keep it top secret. But, how do you think about as a company, like when you're ready to chase those different streams, right? Because I think what founders don't realize when they're not in the trenches is you're basically cutting off, 30, 40, 50% of your resources and then throwing them at a completely different problem that isn't really validated yet, right? Unless you're entering a market that is. So how do you think about, like, is there a certain revenue target or success metrics, small amount of churn that you're waiting for to deploy, or are you just kind of feeling it out?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's like we ask our customers first and foremost, right? So we take a lot of use out of things like post-purchase surveys to understand what other products do they consume, what permission do we have as a brand to be able to introduce new products that a customer would buy, right? If like all of a sudden we started selling a toothbrush, that wouldn't make any sense and people wouldn't buy it, right? So we have to make sure that what are our customers consuming and what do we have permission for us to be able to do for them? Because at the end of the day, like the beautiful thing about like capitalism is it's just like up to whoever wins is whoever's serving the customer best. And so that is the first part. So we're identifying what the opportunities are and we're kind of prioritizing that way. And then we're kind of just looking at, all right, what are the ways that we can grow and what are the ways we can grow within our existing base and what are the ways that we can grow outside our existing base? And those are the strategic conversations that we have. And then we start to talk about, okay, well, if we were to do that, what does that mean in terms of the lift that's required, and how does that fit within our roadmap? And maybe that might mean that what I want to take 3 months takes 9 months. Maybe it means that like what I want to happen in the first quarter of this year has to happen in 2022. Those things happen, and those are discussions, and it's my job. I always try and push, but I'm always really receptive to people saying, look, we can't do that in that level. I have to understand, like, I'm not usually the one executing the actual work at that degree anymore, and have to just be really mindful and listening to what my leadership team is telling me in terms of like what we think is possible without the wheels coming off with the core business.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your take on kind of the D2C landscape more broadly. So you're a super sharp guy. I've been in the space from creating a market all the way to now it's super crowded. And I think that pattern has replicated in a lot of different markets in D2C. It's almost to the point where there's too many direct-to-consumer brands in the spaces where consumers are shopping, where they kind of have to pick one. And what's, in my mind, going to happen is they're almost going to compete away each other, right? They're all going to take the small amount of market share, and there's not going to be one dominant winner. And you'll probably see consolidation. But I'm curious, just do you have any theses about what's going to happen with direct to consumer broadly and how the consumer will evolve over time?
Yeah, so I think the first and foremost part of that is you have to look at why that is, and that's because product companies essentially platform have democratized their ability to start, right? So, okay, I want to start a company. A lot of times that's actually pretty easy to do at the product level at this point. If you're dealing with it's really easy to find supply chain. Okay, fine. Now I need to ship my product over. Okay, well, there's companies like Flexport that everyone can sign up and, get freight transit super easy. All right, I want to spin up a website and have everything. Okay, well, I'm on Shopify. Okay, I want to drop ship. I'm going to use something like ShipBob. So first and foremost, it's because the platforms themselves have enabled a ton of democratization. And I think that's where it's starting. And it's really easy to start product companies now. I do believe in what you're saying, in that unless there are supply chain moats specifically oriented around a product, razors being a good example, that you're going to see a lot of fragmentation in the market. And you'll see a lot of that. That means that people are going to get really personalized experiences, brands that really speak to them, products that really speak to them. And I think that those are all, I think that's good for the customer. And I think that what then that means at a direct-to-consumer company is being really smart about what are the things that still enable moats in order to scale, and what are the valuations that you need to kind of look at a raise level and an exit level in order to win. I think this is something that goes back to when we first started. We've actually found it really lucky that we didn't raise a lot of money early on, and we were scrappy because we kind of started seeing the writing on the wall in 2016, 2017 around what this is going to look like, and that there were not really going to be billion-dollar exits at the D2C level. Now, there were going to be 50 million, 100 million, 200, 300 million companies, but there weren't going to be a lot of billion-dollar exits. And that's really important too. If you're starting a D2C company, you have to understand it's really fun. It's really awesome. It's great to be in a consumer space where people know you. It's amazing to read product reviews of people just their life has changed because they wear Felix Gray. That stuff is so rewarding. But you also have to know, you're not building the next multi-billion-dollar company through a D2C company. And that's totally okay, but you have to know where you stand.
Yeah, I think that was great insight. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And I totally agree. The platform, the democratization has happened because of those powerful platforms. So, if you build a platform business, that's where you get the billion-dollar exits. So one more question in this section is the startup manifesto question. So we asked this to every guest, and a lot of your answers earlier may have had some of these intertwined, but if you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out building a company, what would they be?
Yeah, so I touched upon one is learn to hire well, right? So really talk to people who've done it before. Read different books that are on hiring, build scorecards, understand the interview process, and then don't just kind of like take their word. Find out what works for you and your company. I think that's really important. I think a lot of overachieving people are like, and I'm definitely guilty of this too. It's like, oh, let me just learn what this person has to say and just apply it on top of what we're doing. It's like that will never work. So like feel out what works for you. And then secondly, then like learn to onboard well too, right? So hiring well doesn't mean anything if then you don't put that person in a position to be successful. So if you think that person is going to need 2 more people underneath them and they're not going to be successful without that, and in the interview process, it's pretty clear that that's something that is going to happen and you don't have the budget for those additional 2 people, like, then why are you hiring this other person right now? Like either wait or dedicate the resources if you have them. So I think that's really important, right? Hire well and onboard well are 2 really important things. One thing that I think I learned that halfway through Felix Gray is to really be adamant about doing one-on-ones. So I'm at this point a very big believer that while there's work that gets done and there's strategy and there's tactics and people are executing, people are thinking strategically, like at the end of the day, everyone is a human being with like emotional needs that's behind all that other stuff, right? So if you don't have a one-on-one time every week or 2 weeks with direct reports that allows them like a space to, you can talk strategy, you can talk tactics, but you can also talk emotions. You can talk about career growth. You can talk about different things that are affecting them. It's kind of like having like if you have like an old computer that just like you're constantly like throwing on the ground and all this other shit and it doesn't really work very well, like, yeah, it's not going to run all the programs you want to run very well, right? You got to take care of that stuff first. And I think that what is important is to give a space for people to be able to bring those things up where they don't, if you just say, hey, come to me if you ever have any problems, people don't come to you because they're like, hey, like they're like, David's busy. He's like, doing this, doing that. I'm always running around. Like my calendar looks crazy. And they're like, I'm not going to bother him. And then it just lets the problem continue to persist. And that's never good, right? So having a space that really is a safe space, that is a conversation between you and your direct reports, I think is like, that was one of the most important things that I ever really did. I'd say that the fourth thing is, and I'm still very bad at this and I just try and get better at it every day, is listen first. So I definitely have the tendency to, I like to talk. I am opinionated. I kind of process pretty quickly. So like I'll jump in and that's not really a good thing. Like what I hate is if I'm in a meeting and all of a sudden it's like a dialogue between me and one other person and there's 3 other people on the sideline. And that's usually my fault because I'm not taking the time to listen first. And what I found helps me there is I just have a little notebook and I'll take notes. And that way I'm not kind of saying what's on my mind. I have it to bring up later. I'm not going to forget it, but it gives people the opportunity to speak beyond just me. And then I think if there was like a 5th thing, celebrate the wins. Like there can be bad shit going on, but there's also going to be good stuff going on, right? So recently, like, we were dealing with like a not great update meeting a couple weeks ago, and there's a couple different issues going on. At the same time, my VP of sales said, "Hey, like she announced like we're going into Nordstrom's," and she kind of did it. The tone of the meeting was a little bit more like people are like, "Oh man, like this is the problem right now. We're gonna have to fix this," and she kind of said, and all of a sudden, me and my CEO were like, "Yeah, we got a Nordstrom's. That's awesome!" And everyone like it uplifted the whole meeting, and everyone was super psyched. And I think that like it's a young company. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs. You're going to have to roll the punches. But if you celebrate those wins, everyone is going to feel a lot better, and they're going to feel a lot more motivated to like win the next time, right? Because it's actually getting celebrated, and people want to feel happy at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's a great transition to one of the next questions I wanted to ask was around culture and just, what do you think makes the Felix Gray culture that you're incubating different and better than any other culture, any other team in the world? And what are some of the things that you've done, differently than the standard playbook to get you there?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, initially I wanted to be a lawyer. I like arguing. I like debate. I'm really trying to make sure that we have a culture that I'm a big believer in this idea of productive discourse, right? So it's totally cool to debate and disagree and bring up and voice your opinions and talk about why. But you have to do it first in a respectful way. That's really important. And I think underlying behind all that is like there's a level of trust. And if you don't have that level of trust that's cultivated through things like a one-on-one, right? Where, hey, someone might have felt like they got their toes stepped on and they were treated kind of shittily. And if you don't have that opportunity to bring that stuff out and hash that stuff out, then you don't have that trust. And all of a sudden that person's going to be quiet in the next meeting. And so I think that that's some of the stuff that we're trying to bring is everyone's super smart at Felix Gray, really, really high level of thinking, very thoughtful. And let's make sure that people top down, bottom up, have the ability to voice their opinions and concerns. And I think that what's important there is that they feel listened to and that they feel like there's a trust and safe environment in order to do so. And I think when that doesn't happen, making sure that you have your pulse on that is not actually the case, and that if it's not, like, why it's not the case, and like how you fix those things. I think that those are some of the things that we bring on the cultural side that we just clearly all care a lot. And I think that is something that's pretty awesome because it creates a really, really motivated workforce.
Yeah. Yeah. And the whole, able to productive discourse and having that trust, it's a fine line, right? I'm sure you've experimented with it, and certain people, when they first enter the company, they're not ready for it. And then, you got to coach them back into it.
Yeah, exactly. And everyone has different levels of comfort, and you got to be aware of that, right? And it's also something that we look to hire for, right? So just like a question that I always ask is, can you give me a time when you disagreed with your boss, and like how did you work through that? And can you give me a time when like a direct report disagreed with you, if we're hiring for someone a little bit higher up, and how did that work out, right? Because I really want to understand, do you have the ability to like share your opinion and do it in a way that's productive, and even if it might not be, it went your way, that you're still able to like hop on board, and maybe it did go your way, and like how did if a direct report came to you with something that you didn't initially think was right, and then they convince you, like, that's a good thing, right? Like, things should, like, our opinion should be fluid because we should be open to what other people's feedback is.
Yeah, totally. Now that you're an entrepreneur, looking back, so you obviously you grew up in a medical family, you had your hobbies, you've turned to entrepreneurship, and you've done it for a while. I'm curious, not in a lane of regret, but thinking back, are there any things you wish you spent more time on when you were younger that would have helped, not prepare you, but just honed your mind, sharpened your skills a little bit for this journey? Because I think there's a lot of aspiring entrepreneurs that were probably in your shoes, 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, and they would love to learn from your wisdom, having done this for 7 years.
Yeah, I think that, it's funny, when I was in Venture for America, right, I still have a lot of friends that were fellows there. And a lot of those people they're usually team players, often sports players, that will come. I think that whether sports are your thing or not, right, like maybe it's debate team or mock trial or, Model UN, or maybe it is a sport, whatever it is, I do think there are really, really smart people out there. And some people are, especially if you're like, stereotypically more on like the techie side and you're kind of like programming by yourself, that's all great. But if you're not able to interact with people and build a team and like be part of a team, it's really hard to like build an actual company if you've never been part of a team first. And so like my first thing would be like, go figure out a way to just be part of a team. Doesn't mean you have to like build it from scratch or anything else. Just be part of a team. And just better understand that dynamic, through osmosis. And I think it goes a long way.
Yeah. Well said. All right, let's shift to section 4. So this is the brainstorm. So it's I've kind of got a part 1, part 2 here for you. So the first one is more higher level, and it's just around like emerging trends. So what are some emerging trends or other spaces at a higher level, industry wide, that interest you? Either put your investor hat on or builder hat that you would consider pursuing, and then we'll kind of double click into some ideas after that.
Yeah, so I think that at the e-commerce space, I do think platforms are really important. I think that, but beyond that, I think with the pandemic and what's been going on, I think the new age of working from home and the pseudo model that you're going to see of like these satellite office type of situations, and whether it is at the real estate level and like kind of a rebirth of some of these like WeWorks of the world, or it is products that help facilitate better work, that is going to be really, really, really important. And there's already a lot of those products that are positioned to do well, but I guarantee you that there will be other products that in this pseudo environment are going to come out that are going to be pretty amazing on the work side. So I think that's something to just take a look at. And I don't really know that space very well, but it's just clear that that's a macro trend. Most people through the pandemic have been like, yeah, I do enjoy working from home to like a certain extent. And people that are a little bit older who are more in positions of power, like, wow, my workforce actually gets stuff done when they're at home. We're not just like watching TV, we're doing stuff. And I think that solving those needs is going to be really important. And then I think that from a healthcare perspective, you're going to also see that acceleration where there's going to be more and more virtual orientation on the health side, because for forever people were locked down. They couldn't go to the dentist. They couldn't, get their eyes checked. They couldn't see these different things. And if you can enable technology that either supplements fully or helps the process for these healthcare companies to work with, their patients, those two things are going to be really interesting areas to watch out for. That I think that, again, it's not the pandemic and COVID has not kind of created these markets. It's only just accelerated them by a good 10 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens off the back of this. I think the next 2 years, especially in the environment we're in, it's going to be a catalyst for a lot of those businesses. All right. So lastly, I love this question. This has become my favorite on the show is kind of the brainstorm. So this is how I love to frame it. If let's say Felix Gray was gone tomorrow, RIP Felix Gray, and you couldn't build a new brand in this space, what's another idea that excites you enough today that you would consider, building a business starting tomorrow in? And we can just riff back and forth on some of the, poke of the holes and talk about how you bring it to market.
Yeah, I think there's probably some really interesting things around. I know the e-commerce space, right? So I think that there's probably some interesting things at the platform level there that are pretty cool. So, I definitely think I think there are great brands to start first and foremost. And I think the interesting things with good brands, there either has to be pretty strong retention baked into the inherent business model, or there is a strong CPG component that will serve it well. So, like, for instance, we're starting to grow out our omni-channel expansion pretty significant ways. I think that those are places that have moats because a Target retailer has limited shelf space. So they're not bringing in whereas anyone can advertise on Facebook and have a Shopify site, not all of them can then land on the shelves of Target. And so businesses like that, I do think are still amazing brands to start. So when you think about food, when you think about cleaning products, those are some really interesting places to start. And then I think that there's some really interesting ways of when you kind of look at who is driving a lot of sales and awareness, it often is at the influencer level. And I think there's probably some really interesting ways to build businesses that allow those people to directly take advantage of their influence and grow their businesses in pretty easy and democratized ways, right? So you'll see that happen, right? Kylie Jenner building $1 billion makeup business is because of her influence. And you'll see, there's a company in the eyewear space that teamed up with a bunch of celebrities called Pre Revo. They sold for $100 million to Safilo. So you will see that happen. But, the normal YouTube star that has 100,000 followers might not be able to cash in on that, but they might be able to soon. And I think that those are some interesting businesses to look out for.
Yeah, that last piece is super fascinating because I think if you think about why didn't, let's call them the mid to large tier influencers, the mega tier, the Jake Pauls, Kylie Jenners, they've already figured it out. They have so much experiment money to burn and resources at their disposal. Why haven't the mid to large tier pursued that? It's because they didn't have either the resources, the know-how, or because the platforms weren't built yet to allow them to do it with ease or at least experiment lower risk. So
Yep.
that's fascinating. What do you think would be the play there if you were trying to build a business around that? Would it be like a services-based company that where you basically were the middle layer between connecting that influencer and some of these, you give them the toolkit and the how-tos and you support them from the supply chain and ops perspective? Or how would you think about it?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, it would probably be a little bit of everything. But if you think about the marketing off the bat, like your cost per acquisition is going to be really small if you have good influence. So it then becomes a supply chain question. It becomes like supply chain, inventory, financing, all those things that are difficult to do. And every single person in a physical product company has to get over that hurdle. And if like from earlier, you're talking about like different lessons, I definitely like when we first started and, when we first kind of started to take off, like our operations were a complete mess. And that was negatively affecting our NPSs. Is like you would like, see Facebook or Instagram ads and all of a sudden there'd be comments like haven't gotten my thing in 3 weeks. Like it was negatively affecting the customer experience. It was negatively affecting our brand. And so we put a lot of money into operations. I think that stuff is not only scary to start, but it's scary to maintain. So I think that focusing on that level is important, but then obviously as you're looking to scale, making sure that there are marketing solutions beyond just your influence are ways to continue to grow. And then I think at the platform level, it's making sure that you're then being selective about potentially who you're working with at first. Like I think there's definitely a lot of potential holes that you can poke in that business, but it is something where, we pay influencers for they love the product, but we still pay them. There's an interesting way of turning it around where like, why is that influencer not starting the brand themselves?
Yeah. And so, a question on that, how do you think about how much penetration or like how much juice the influencer is squeezing out of their audience in terms of like conversion to purchase for you every time you work with them? Because what I'm wondering is why aren't brands creating deeper partnerships with influencers that are longer lasting, not just like a single ad or like a round of ads, but actually, you've seen this a little bit where the big mega brands will do a collaborative partnership where the brand makes like a version of their product. But even those seem like half-assed kind of when it comes to the marketing and promotion after the initial blast. Why do you think that doesn't happen more? And how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think you exhaust audiences pretty quickly.
Yeah.
It's like, that
Simple
person
as
has like, a reach of, 100,000 people, call it 1 million people. Maybe a percent or two of those people are actually going to end up purchasing, and they might get hit over the head with it a little bit to get a little bit of awareness. But at some point, you're going to find that you've exhausted that audience, and you're going to have to wait maybe 4 months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year until that audience is kind of more people are ready to buy again. They've heard about you from other ways, or that influencer has brought in more people into their mix. I think that is really where it comes down to, and you see that at every level, right? Like podcasts, where we do a lot of podcast advertising, it's the same type of thing, right? Where we're not going to advertise every single day on a podcast because at some point that audience is completely exhausted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know you got to get out of here. So one last point I'll make on it is I'm sure, the influencer space is fascinating to me because really what it boils down, it's just advocacy. It's just another form of advocacy. This is how word of mouth has been working for millennia at this point. But what's fascinating is I feel like the strategy for most companies is to kind of target a sector of influencers and, spread the love around. But at the end of the day, aren't those audiences fairly overlapping, right? Like the people that are following one, maybe following numbers 2, 4, and 6. And so, like how do companies think about placing their bets? Wouldn't it make more sense, although maybe unconventional, to spread around different complementary like sectors?
Yeah. So I think that this is where like, at the end of the day, what we really look at more than anything else, like money in, money out, like, because it gets so complicated. Because you're right, it could have that effect. On the flip side, it might have a multiplier effect, because I'm a big believer in like there's Instagram brands and then there's like brands, right? So if I just see a brand on Instagram and all I see them on Instagram, it's like, all right, these guys are like really not that big. I'm only seeing them in one place. Now I start to listen to you on a podcast. Okay, I follow this influencer. I heard about you that way. Then I heard about you from this other influencer that I also follow. And now you have this kind of halo where it's like, like this is legit. They're kind of all over the place. I'm not just seeing it in my like feed as a paid advertisement. And that I think is the flip side of it, right? So I think it could go either way. And really at the end of the day, at the marketing level, it's like dollars in, dollars out. And then you're kind of measuring attribution through clicks, through how did you hear about a surveys. But like at the full end of the day, you really just look at money in, money out.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of room for like the analytics behind social influence to build out. I mean, podcasts have some of the worst analytics ever. Like people don't even know like how many subscribers they have. So I'm sure there's a long way to go for that.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think that it'll be interesting to see as Spotify continues to invest heavily into podcasts, if they start to create better advertising tools. Because like right now you get you don't have listens, you have downloads. And it works really, really well for like the podcast groups because that nebulousness is really nice for the podcast hosts. But the best podcast hosts, if they're getting a ton of engagement, you should want to know that, right? And so I do think that there's really interesting ways to build. I think it would have to be an existing company that is a big, massive podcasting platform already where people consume, because I don't think that they're willing to just integrate a tool on top of that. So it'll be interesting to see, but I think like Spotify and Apple are probably the two best positioned. And Spotify has definitely put a lot of money and thought into growing out podcasts on the consumer side. I have a feeling they're probably going to start doing some pretty interesting things on the advertising side too.
Yeah, totally. Man, I love this conversation. I know you got to go. So before I let you go, I just want to acknowledge you quickly for a second. You know, you're obviously a super sharp guy. I think I'm hosting the show. I'm also listening. I'm a massive fan, of course, as I said, of the brand and you. And I think one thing to take away that I hope listeners take away a lot of nuggets, but one thing in particular, just how devoted to the customer I can tell you are and the brand is, right? You've referenced NPS so many times. You care so much about how the customer interprets the brand and reacts to the products. And so, you know, that's a breath of fresh air. I think it's a cliche, but not all brands actually care about that. And so I just want to, you know, thank you for that as a customer, and also thank you for coming on so much. And I'll continue to support you as much as possible.
I appreciate that. And like, there's one thing that you could recognize from that makes me like the most psyched and proud. So thank you.
Amazing. David Roger, co-founder and CEO of Felix Gray. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks so much.